Okay, still in this Acts of Pilate. This time we're on chapter 5. The title of this book is called Gamaliel's Interview with Joseph and Mary and Others Concerning Jesus. The Holy Writings found in the Saint Sophia Mosque in Constantinople, however you say that, made by Gamaliel in the Talmuds of the Jews 27b. It seems Gamaliel was sent by the Sanhedrin to interrogate Joseph and Mary in regard to this child Jesus, he says. I found Joseph and Mary in the city of Mecca in the land of Ammon or Moab, but I did not find Jesus. When I went to the place where I was told he was somewhere else. And thus I followed him from place to place until I despaired of finding him at all. Whether he knew that I was in search of him and did it to elude me, I cannot tell. Though I think it most likely the former was the reason, for his mother says he is bashful and shuns company. Joseph is a woodworkman, and he is very tall and ugly. His hair looks as though it might have been dark auburn when young. His eyes are gray and vicious. He is anything but a prepossessing in his appearance, and he is as gross and gloom as he looks. But he is but a poor talker, and it seems that yes and no are the depths of his mind. I am satisfied he is very disagreeable to his family. His children look very much like him, and upon the whole, I should call them a third-rate family. I asked him who were his parents, and he said his father's name was Jacob and his grandfather Matthew, and he did not talk or like to talk on the subject. He is very jealous, and I told him that we had heard that he had a vision, and I was sent to ascertain the facts of the case. He said he did not call it a vision, he called it a dream, and he said after he and Mary had agreed to marry, it seemed that something told him that Mary was with child, and he did not know whether he was asleep or awake, but it made such an impression in his mind that he concluded to have nothing more to do with her. And while he was working one day under a shed, all at once a man in a snowy white stood by his side and told him not to doubt the virtue of Mary, for she was holy before the Lord, and the child conceived in her was not by man, but by the Holy Ghost, and that the child would be free from human passions. In order to do this, he must, that is, in his humanity, must be of the extract of Alma, that is the Hebrew word for virgin, that he might endure through all things and not resist and fill the demands of the prophecy. He said the angel told him that this child should be great and should rule over the kingdoms of the world, and said that this is the child set up. He said that this child should set up a new kingdom wherein should dwell the righteousness and peace, and the kingdoms of the world which should oppose him God would utterly destroy. And I asked him, how could a virgin conceive of herself without the germination of a male? He said, "This is the work of God. He has brought to life the womb of Elizabeth, so she had conceived and will bear a son in her old age and will go before and tell the people of the coming king." After telling me all these things, he disappeared like the melting down of a light. When then, or I then went and told Mary what had occurred, and she told me that the same angel or one like him had appeared to her and told her the same things. So I married Mary, thinking that if what the angel had told us was true, it would be greatly to our advantage. But I am fearful we were mistaken. Jesus seems to take no interest in us or anything else much. I call him lazy and careless, and I do not think he will ever amount to much less be a king. If he does, he must do a great deal better than he is doing. I asked him how long after that interview with the angel before the child was born. He said he did not know, but he thought it was 7 or 8 months. I asked where they were at the time, and he said in Bethlehem. The Roman commander had given orders for all the Jews to go on a certain day to be enrolled as taxpayers, and he and Mary went to Bethlehem as the nearest place of enrollment, and while there, this babe was born. I asked if anything strange had occurred there that night. He said that the people were much excited, but he was too tired. He was so tired that he had gone to sleep and saw nothing. He said toward day there were several priests came in to see him and the babe, and gave them many presents, and the news got circulated that this child was to be king of the Jews. And it created such an excitement that he took the child and his mother and came to Moab for protection, for fear the Romans would kill the child and keep it from being a rival to the Romans. I discovered that all Joseph's ideas were of a selfish kind. All he thought of was himself. Mary is altogether a different character. She is too noble to be the wife of such a man. She seems to be about 40 or 45 years of age, abounds with a cheerful and happy spirit, and is happy and is full of happy fantasies. She is fair to see, rather fleshly, as soft and innocent looking eyes, and seems to be naturally a good woman. As I asked her who her parents were, she said her father's name was Eli and her mother's name was Anna. Her grandmother's name was Peniel, a widow of the tribe of Asher, of great renown. I asked her if Jesus was the son of Joseph, and she said he was not. I asked her to relate the circumstances of the child's history, and she said that one day while she was grinding some meal, there appeared at the door a stranger in shining raiment, which showed as bright as the light. She was very much alarmed at his presence and trembled like a leaf. But all her fears were calmed when he spoke to her, for he said, "Mary, thou art loved by the Lord, and he has sent me to tell thee that thou shalt have a child, that this child will be great and rule all the nations of the earth." She continued, "I immediately thought of my engagement to Joseph, and supposed that was the way the child would come. But he astonished me more when he told me that my cousin Elizabeth had conceived and would bear a son, whose name was to be John, and my son should be called Jesus. This caused me to remember that Zacharias had seen a vision and disputed with the angel, and for that he was struck with dumbness, and so that he could no longer hold the priest's office. I asked the messenger if Joseph knew anything about the matter. He said that he told Joseph and I was to have a child by the commandment of the Holy Ghost, and that he was to redeem his people from their sins and was to reign over the whole world, and every man should confess to him that he should rule over all the kings of the earth. I asked her how he knew that he was an angel, and she said he had told her, and then she knew he was an angel from the way that he came and went. I asked her to describe how he came and went from her, and she said that he seemed to melt away like the extinguishing uh, of a light. I asked her if she knew anything of John the Baptist, and she said he lived in the mountains of Judea, and last she knew of him, I asked her if he and Jesus were acquainted or did they visit. She said she said she did not think they knew each other. I asked her if at the time this angel, as she called him, visited her, she was an alma, that is, a virgin. She said she was, and she had never shown to a man, nor was known by a man. I asked her if she, at the time, had maintained her forchette, and after making and Joseph understand what I meant, they both said that she had, and Joseph said this was the way he had of testing her virtue. I asked her if she knew when conception took place. She said she did not. I asked her if she was in any pain in bearing or in delivering the child. She said none of any consequence. I asked her if she was healthy to give me a description of his life. She said that he was perfectly healthy, that she had never heard of him complain of any pain or dissatisfaction. His food always agreed with him, that he would eat anything set before him, and if anyone else complained, he would often say he thought it good enough, much better than what we deserved. And she said that Joseph was a little too hard to please, but this boy had answered him so often, and his answers were so mild yet so suitable, that he had almost broken him of finding fault. She said he settled all the disputes of the family and had no odds what was the subject or who it was. One word from him closed all mouths and gave him such power, was the words were always unpretending and spoken as though they were not intended as a rebuke, but merely as a decision. I asked her if she had ever seen him angry or out of humor. She said she had seen him apparently vexed and grieved at the disputes and the follies of others, but had never seen him angry. I asked her if he had any worldly aspirations after money or wealth or a great name, or did he delight in fine dress like most of the youth. She said that was the one thing that vexed her. He seemed to take no care of his person. He did not care whether he was dressed or not, or whether the family got along well or ill. It was all alike to him. She said she talked to him about it, but he would look at her a little grieved and say, "Woman," for such he always called me. "You do not know who I am." Indeed, she said, it takes too little interest to the things of this world and the great question of the day. They were beginning to despair of his ever amounting to much, much less being a king. And the angel said he would be. If so, he would have to act in a very differently from what he was acting at the time. I told her that the Jewish doctors contended that the amorous disposition is particular to the male, and I asked her if she had ever seen in the private life of Jesus any sign of disposition. She said he had not. She had not. I asked if she saw in him any particular fondness for female society. She said she had not. If anything, rather contrary. The beautiful Bethal, the word in Hebrew for young woman, were all very fond of him, and he were always seeking, were always seeking his society, and yet he seemed to care nothing for them. If they appeared too fond of him, he treated them almost with scorn. I will often get up and leave, or he will often get up and leave, and wandered away and spent time in meditation and prayer. He is perfect ascetic in his life, and when I see how people like to be with him and ask him questions, and he seems to take such a delight in his answers, seem to take such delight in his answers, both men and women, it almost vexes me. They say there is a young woman in Bethany whom he intends to marry, but unless he changes his course very much, he will never be qualified to have a family. But I do not believe the report. He never seems to me to care anything about women when he is in my presence. Thus it seems that Joseph and Mary have both lost all confidence in his becoming anything. They seem to think that the Sanhedrin should do something for him to get him out and let him show himself to the people. I tried to console them by telling them that my understanding of the prophecy was that he had to come to the high priesthood first, and there work in the spiritual dominion of the heart. And when he had brought about a unity of heart and oneness of aim, it would be easy enough to establish his political claim, and all who would not willingly submit to him, it would be an easy manner with the sword of Joshua or Gideon to bring under his control. It seems to me that his parents' ideas were more of a selfish character, and they care nothing about the Jewish government nor the Roman opposition or the Roman oppression. All they think of is self-exaltation and to be personally benefited by their son's greatness. But I told them they were mistaken, that the building up of the kingdom of heaven was not to be done by mighty nor by power, but the Spirit of the Lord, and it would not do for us any use cardinal weapons, nor to expect cardinal pleasures to be derived therefrom, that it was not my understanding of the prophecies that this king was to use such weapons neither for himself nor for the benefit of the party, but for the good of all men. That is, his dominion was to be universal, and it was to be of the spiritual character, that he was to send to the lost and not to the found. His parents told me of an old man who lived on the road to Bethany and who had once been a priest, a man of great learning and well skilled in the laws and prophets, and that Jesus was often there with him, reading the law and the prophets together, that his name was Gamaliel, and that I might find Jesus there, but he was not there. Gamaliel said that he was often at Bethany with a young family, and he thought there was some love affair between him and one of the girls. I asked him if he had seen anything like courtship between him. He said he had not, but inferred from their intimacy, from the fondness of the woman's part, as well as from the laws of nature, that such would be the case, I asked him to give me an outline from the character of Jesus, and he said that he was a young man of the finest thought and feeling he had ever saw in his life, that he was the most apt in his answers and the solutions of difficult problems of any man of his age he had ever seen, that his answers seemed to give more universal satisfaction, so so that the oldest philosopher would not dispute with him, or any manner join issue with him, or ask the second time. I, Masselian, who taught him to read and interpret the law and the prophets, he said that his mother. I asked Masselian, who taught him to read or to interpret the law and the prophets. He said that his mother had said that he had always known how to read the law, that his mind seemed to master it from the beginning, and into the laws of nature and the relation of man, to this fellow in inspiring mutual love and strengthening the common trust of society. Another plan he has of setting men right with the laws of nature. He turns nature into a great law book of illustrations, showing that every bush is a flame, and every rocky fountain of water, every starry pillar of fire, and every great cloud that leads to God. He makes all nature preach the doctrine of trust in divine fatherhood. He speaks of the lilies as pledges of God's care, and points to the fowls as evidence of his watchfulness over the human affairs. Who can measure the distance between God and the flower of the field? What connection is there between man and the lily? By such illustrations, he creates a solitude in man and seems to awe him into reverence, and he becomes attracted toward heavenly thought and feels that he is in the presence of one that is his superior. In this talk, he brings one to feel he is very near the presence of God. He says, how much more your Father. The plane is one, though the intermediate points are immeasurably distant. By thus the beginning with the flower, he reasoned upward to the absolute, and then descends and teaches lessons of trust in a loving Father. The lessons of trust in God reassure the anxious listener and create an appetite that makes him long for more. And it often seems, when he has brought his hearers to the highest point of anxiety, he suddenly breaks out and leaves his company as though he cared nothing for them. Jesus, in his talks, brings all these illustrations to make man feel his nearness to his kindred. Man, teaching also their relation to the dependence upon God. And although his method is happy, he does not seem to me that it is the most successful. He teaches that man and the flowers and the birds drink from the same fountain and are fed from the same table. Yet at the same time, he seems to do everything to excite suspicion and prejudice. We that are watching him to see his divine mission commence, he is continually tantalizing our expectations as well as mocking our natural reason and desires. When a man separates himself from all other men, both in point of doctrine as well as in discipline, he takes a very great risk on his part, especially when he confines God to one channel and one of his own dictation. A man that assumes these responsible positions must have vast resources from which to draw, or he will sink in the whirlpool which his own impertinence and created through or has created through Jesus in his teachings or talks. His words are so much like the teachings of Hillel or Shammai, that I must call it teaching, though he has no special scholars. We learn that God is spirit and God is Father, and he says these things are only two things that are essential, are the only two things that are essential for man to know. When he illustrates this to the parents and asks them what would they do for their children, he was telling some mothers a circumstance of his mother starving herself to feed her child, and then applied it to God as our Father, and they commenced shouting and were so happy, and Jesus got up and left the house in seeming disgust. Massillon says he is tempted at times to become impatient with Jesus, as he devotes so much time to the details. It seems almost a waste of time for a man who came to save the world to be lingering over a special case of disease. He thinks he could hasten Jesus's physical deportment. Why not speak one word to remove every sick patient from his sick bed at the same hour? What a triumph it would be. And I asked him if Jesus had healed anyone. He said, not as yet, but if he is to be king of the Jews, he was to heal all nations, and why not do all at once? If he would, there would be nothing more required to establish his kingship. But I said to him, it is not unequally so with God's creative power. See what time the labor it takes to bring forth a grain of corn. Why not have caused the earth to bring forth every month instead of every year? Christ was taking the defense of his Father, but people must learn to love and to obey the Father before they would revere the Son or reverence the Son. Yes, he said the God that Jesus represented was that the one people might love and venerate, that he was a God of love and had no bloody designs to execute on a or to execute even on a bad man, provided he ceased in his evil ways. It is to be noted that all Jesus's talk, there are manifest references to the future. Many of his statements were like a sealed letter not to be opened by time. A grain of mustard was to result in a large tree, but his ideas refer to the future, like the parent helping the child with his burden of today by telling the blessings of tomorrow, and by making today the seed corn of tomorrow, keeping the action of today under moral control and making the morrow the day of judgment. He stated further that Jesus was a young man who had the best judge of human nature he had ever seen, that he thought that at times he could tell men their thoughts and expose their bad principles. And while he had all these advantages of life, he seemed not to care for them or to use them abusively. He seems to like all men, one as well as another, so much so that his own parents have become disgusted with him and have almost cut him off. But Jesus has a particular temperature that he seems not to care and is well satisfied as or with one as another. He said that Jesus seems fond of Mary and Martha, who lived at Bethany, and probably I might find him there. Massillon is a man of very deep thought and most profound judgment. All his life, he made the scriptures his study. He too is a good judge of human nature, and he is satisfied that Jesus is the Christ. He said that Jesus seems to understand the prophecy by intuition. I asked him where Jesus was taught to read the prophecy, and he said that his mother told him that Jesus could read from the beginning and that no one had ever taught him to read. He said that he had, in making quotations from the prophets, was sometimes mistaken or from his memory failed him. He said that he was, in making quotations from the prophets, was sometimes mistaken or from memory, his memory failed him. But Jesus could correct him every time without a scroll, and that sometimes he thought Jesus was certainly mistaken, but never in a single instance was he wrong. I asked him to describe his person to me so that I might know him if I should meet him. He said, if you were to meet him, you would know him. While he was nothing but a man, there is something about him that distinguishes him from every other man. He is the picture of his mother, only he has not her smooth, round face. His hair is a little more golden than hers, though it is much more from sunburn as anything else. He is tall and his shoulders are a little drooped. His visage is thin and of a swarthy complexion, though this is from exposure. His eyes are large and a soft blue and rather dull and heavy. The lashes are long and his eyebrows are very large. His nose is that of a Jew. In fact, he reminds me of an old-fashioned Jew in every sense of the word. He is not a great talker unless there is something brought up about heaven or and divine things. When his tongue moves glibly and his eyes light up with a particular brilliancy, though there is nothing particularity about Jesus. He never argues a question. He never disputes. He will commence and state facts, and they are on such a solid basis that nobody will have the boldness to dispute with him. Though he has such mastership of judgment, he takes no pride in confounding his opponents, but always seems to be sorry for them, and I have seen him attacked by the scribes and by the doctors of the law, and they seem like little children learning their lessons under a master. His strongest points are in the spiritual power of the law and the intentions of the prophets. The young people try to get him to take a class of them and teach them, but he utterly refuses. This Jew is convinced that he is the Messiah of the world. I went from there to Bethany, but Jesus was not there. They said he and Lazarus were away. They could not tell where. I went and saw Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, and had a long talk with them. They are very pleasant and nice young maids, and Mary is quite handsome. I teased her about Jesus, but they both denied that Jesus was anything like a lover. He was only a friend, though this is so common for young maids. I did not know whether to believe them or not until I told them my real business. And when I told them that this was the same person that was born of a virgin in Bethlehem some 26 years before, and this his mother had told me all the facts of the case, they seemed deeply interested, but they told me upon their honor that Jesus had never talked or hinted to either one of them on the subject of marriage. Martha blushed, and she wished he had. If he was to be a king, she would like to be a queen. I answered them if they had ever seen him in the company of any young virgins, and they said they had not. I asked him if they had heard him talk about young girls, or if he sought their society more than that of men. They both declared that he had not, and they were very much surprised that he did not. I asked them what he talked of when in their company, and they said that he was not much in their company, that he and their brother would go upon the housetop and stay there half the night and sometimes all night, talking and arguing points of interest to them both. Mary said that she had often gone near and she could listen to them, for she loved to hear them talk. He was so mild and unpretending that there was so intelligent that he and then was so intelligent that he was different from any of the other and all the other young men she had ever seen. I asked them what was their brother's opinion of him. They said that he thought that there was never such a man on earth. He thought him to be one of God's prophets, and said when they are out in the mountains, as they are most of the time, Jesus can tell him about the flowers and the rocks and the trees, and tell him about everything in the world, and that none of the wild animals are afraid of him. He says often the stag and the wolf will come and stand for Jesus to stroke their mane, and seems almost loath to go away from him. He says that no poisonous serpent will offer to hiss at him. Their brother thinks he is perfectly safe if Jesus is with him. I asked him if he had ever told their brother about anything about himself, and they said that if he had spoken to their brother, he had not told them. Now, masters of Israel, having investigated this matter after tracing Jesus from his conception to the present time, after obtaining all the information that is to be had on this important subject, getting it from those who are more likely to tell the truth from the fact that they are disinterested persons, and they then taking a prophetical as well as a historical view of the subject, I have come to the conclusion that this is the Christ that we are looking for. And as a reason for my conclusion, I will call to your attention to the following facts. First, to the prophecy of Isaiah section 7. And he said, "Hear now, saith the Lord, O house of David, is it a small thing for you? Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name God is with men. Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and to choose the good. For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good. The land that God abhorrest shall be forsaken of her king. Section 8. Bind the testimony, seal the law among his disciples. The Lord will hide his face from the house of Jacob and will look for him. He is a literal fulfillment of this word of the Most High God, so clear and plain that none may mistake. Jeremiah's 31st section. Turn, O virgin, thy people, for the land of Yahuwah is upon thee. For the Lord shall create a new thing in the earth. A woman shall encompass a man. Here again are set forth the same things that Isaiah speaks of, and the same things that I have learned from Mary. Micah section 5. Thou Bethlehem Ephratah, thou art little among the thousands of Judah. Out of thee shall come forth unto me him that shall rule my people. He is from everlasting, and I will give them up until the time she travaileth to bring forth my firstborn, that he may rule all people. There we have the city, the virgin, the office, his manner of life, the seeking him by the Sanhedrin. All these things are under our eyes as full and complete as I now write them, who have all this testimony given in this letter. How can we as a people dispute those things? In the 49th section of Genesis, making reference to the history that is now upon us, the writer says, a captive shall depart not from Judah, nor a lawgiver from him, until Shiloh come and gather his people between his feet and keep them forever.